The morning on New Haven started like any other morning. The twin suns rose over the fields where crops grew in neat rows. Children walked to school carrying their bags and laughing with friends. Jake Morrison stood on his porch drinking coffee and watching his daughter Lily ride her bicycle down the street. She waved at him and he waved back. Life was good on this colony world. 15,000 people had made their homes here, building a future far from Earth. Jake commanded the small military garrison on New Haven. It was an easy job, most days. He dealt with broken equipment or helped colonists with wild animals that wandered too close to the farms. There had never been any real danger. The galaxy was mostly peaceful. Humanity had made friends with several alien species and trade was growing. Some people worried about hostile aliens, but those fears seemed silly on a beautiful morning like this. The alarm started at 9 in the morning. Jake was in his office doing paperwork when the screens lit up with warnings. Ships were entering the system, lots of ships. His hands moved quickly across the controls, trying to get information. The computer counted 20 vessels, then 30, then 50. They were not responding to communication attempts. They were not broadcasting identification codes. They were just coming straight toward New Haven. Jake hit the emergency alert and grabbed his radio. He called his second in command, a young officer named Pete Hughes. Pete's voice came back shaky with fear. He was looking at the same screens. Those were warships approaching. Big ones. The colonists had no real defenses. Their few patrol boats were meant for search and rescue, not combat. Jake ordered Pete to start evacuation procedures and get people into the underground shelters. The streets filled with confusion. Parents grabbed their children. Teachers led students toward the nearest shelter entrances. The alarm kept blaring its warning across the colony. Jake ran outside and saw the ships entering the atmosphere. They were massive, dark shapes that blocked out the suns. He had never seen anything like them. The design was alien and aggressive, covered in weapons and armor. Jake sprinted toward the school where Lily was. His heart pounded in his chest. The radio crackled with reports from his soldiers. The alien ships were landing on the outskirts of town. Doors were opening. Something was coming out. Then the screaming started. The aliens moved through the streets, killing everyone they found. They stood on 6 legs with hard shells covering their bodies. Their faces had too many eyes and mandibles that clicked as they moved. They carried weapons that fired bright pulses of energy. Every shot was fatal. They did not talk. They did not demand surrender. They just killed. Jake reached the school and found chaos. Teachers were trying to get children into the basement. He pushed through the crowd searching for Lily. She was not in her classroom. Someone said they saw her running toward the community center 2 blocks away. Jake turned and ran back outside. The aliens were everywhere now. Buildings burned. Bodies lay in the streets. Jake saw his neighbor Carl trying to shield his wife and got cut down by energy fire. He saw old Mrs. Patterson stumbling from her home only to be killed on her doorstep. The aliens showed no mercy. Age did not matter. Begging did not help. They simply executed everyone they encountered. Jake found Lily outside the community center. She was with a group of children trying to reach the shelter entrance. He shouted her name and she turned, her face lighting up when she saw him. She started running toward him. The alien appeared from around a corner. Jake saw it raise its weapon. He was too far away. He screamed and ran, but time moved like honey, thick and slow. The energy blast hit Lily in the chest. She fell without a sound. Jake caught her as she collapsed. Her eyes looked up at him, confused and scared. Blood spread across her shirt. She tried to say something, but no words came out. Jake held her and begged her to stay with him. Her hand squeezed his fingers once, then went limp. She was gone. Something broke inside Jake in that moment. The world became distant and cold. He picked up a rifle from a fallen soldier and started firing at the aliens. He hit 2 of them before more appeared. They would have killed him, but Pete and 3 other soldiers arrived and dragged him into a building. They barricaded the door and made their way to the shelter through underground tunnels. The shelters were designed to hold 5,000 people in emergencies. Over 7,000 were crammed inside when they sealed the doors. The lights flickered. Children cried. Adults sat in shock trying to understand what was happening. Jake moved through the crowd in a daze. His hands were still covered in Lily's blood. The attack continued for 6 hours. They could hear the aliens moving overhead. Sometimes the shelter shook from explosions. The power failed twice, but the backup generators kicked in. People whispered prayers. Some asked why this was happening. Nobody had answers. When the sounds finally stopped, Jake accessed the surface cameras from a control panel. What he saw destroyed any hope. New Haven was gone. Every building burned or collapsed. Smoke filled the air. Bodies covered the streets. The aliens had been thorough. They killed every person they found, men, women, children, elderly. Nobody was spared. The alien ships stayed in orbit for 2 more days. They broadcast their attack across space, sending the recordings to every known species. It was a message, a warning. They were called the Valkyrie, and they considered humanity weak and unworthy. This massacre was meant to teach humans their place in the galaxy. Rescue ships arrived on the 3rd day. Military vessels from Earth found 312 survivors in the shelters scattered across the colony site. Captain Nicole Harper commanded the first ship to land. She was a career officer who had seen combat before, but nothing prepared her for New Haven. She walked through the ruins with tears on her face. Her crew vomited at the smell. They found bodies everywhere, left to rot in the streets. Jake gave Captain Harper the recordings. He had saved everything the cameras captured, every murder, every burning home, every dead child. He made her promise to deliver them to Earth Command. His voice was empty when he spoke. The grief had burned away, leaving only cold determination. Nicole looked at this broken man covered in his daughter's blood and made a promise. The Valkyrie thought they were teaching humanity a lesson. They were wrong. Humanity was about to teach them what real terror meant. The blood debt would be paid. Every drop would be answered with fire and ruin. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you made humanity angry. Admiral Richard Blake watched the recordings in his office on Earth. He sat alone in the dark room as the screens showed. New Haven burning. He watched children die. He watched homes destroyed. He watched the Valkyrie massacre 15,000 innocent people for no reason except cruelty. When the recordings ended, he sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then he picked up his communication device and started making calls. The response from Earth was immediate and total. Every military ship was recalled to home ports. Factories that made civilian goods switched to weapons production. Shipyards that built passenger vessels started building warships. Mining operations doubled their output. Research facilities focused entirely on military technology. The entire industrial capacity of humanity shifted to war footing within a week. Other species in the galaxy watched with surprise. They expected humanity to file protests with the Concordat Assembly. They thought there would be diplomatic negotiations and economic sanctions. Maybe humanity would demand reparations or territory. That was how civilized species handled conflicts. Violence was supposed to be a last resort, used sparingly and with regret. Humanity did not file protests. There were no negotiations. Admiral Blake sent one message to the Valkyrie Empire. It said only 3 words: "We are coming." The Valkyrie leadership laughed when they received the message. They had terrorized a dozen species into submission over the centuries. They were one of the most feared military powers in the galaxy. Humanity was young and soft, new to space and untested in real war. The massacre at New Haven was meant to keep them in their place. If humans wanted to waste resources on a pointless military buildup, let them. It changed nothing. Captain Nicole Harper volunteered to lead the first strike force. Her ship, the Defiant, was in dock getting repairs when New Haven happened. She requested immediate reassignment to combat duty. The images of dead colonists haunted her dreams. She could not save them, but she could make the Valkyrie pay for what they did. Her crew volunteered to a person. They knew this mission would be dangerous. The Valkyrie had superior technology and more combat experience, but none of that mattered. Mechanics worked triple shifts to get the Defiant ready. Weapons officers drilled constantly. Everyone wanted to be part of the response. Jake Morrison refused to stay on Earth. The military wanted him to take leave, to rest and grieve. They offered him counseling and a desk job. He rejected everything. His daughter was dead. His home was ashes. The only thing left was making the Valkyrie regret what they had done. They promoted him to colonel and assigned him to lead ground combat teams. He trained with an intensity that worried his fellow officers. He never smiled. He barely slept. All he did was prepare for the next fight. Lieutenant Dan Carter worked in weapons development before. New Haven, he was a scientist who enjoyed solving technical problems. After seeing the massacre recordings, he requested transfer to active development of offensive systems. His superiors approved immediately. Don had brilliant ideas about new weapons, terrible things that made even military commanders uncomfortable. He did not care. The Valkyrie needed to learn that humanity could be just as brutal as they were. 3 months after New Haven, the first human strike force entered Valkyrie space. Nicole commanded 12 destroyers fitted with experimental weapons. They avoided the main shipping lanes and military bases. Instead, they targeted a remote supply depot in the outer territories. Intelligence said it was lightly defended with mostly automated systems. The attack lasted 15 minutes. Human ships appeared without warning and opened fire with kinetic weapons that punched through Valkyrie shields like paper. The depot had 3 defense platforms that managed to shoot back before being destroyed. 2 cargo ships tried to escape, but human missiles tracked them down. When the shooting stopped, the depot was gone and 6 Valkyrie vessels were debris. The strike force jumped back to human space before reinforcements could arrive. They had not lost a single ship. Nicole studied the combat data during the trip home. The Valkyrie technology was good but not overwhelming. Their ships were tough but slow. Their weapons hit hard but took time to recharge. There were weaknesses that could be exploited. Admiral Blake received the report with satisfaction. The first blood had been drawn. He ordered more raids, hitting targets across Valkyrie territory. Supply convoys vanished. Communication relays went dark. Mining operations were destroyed. The attacks followed no pattern. Sometimes they hit military targets, sometimes civilian infrastructure. The Valkyrie could not predict where humanity would strike next. The Valkyrie Empire responded with outrage. They sent battle groups to hunt the human raiders but never found them. Human ships used hit-and-run tactics, striking fast and disappearing before the enemy could respond. It was cowardly by Valkyrie standards. Real warriors fought pitched battles face to face. These humans attacked like parasites, hiding and running. 4 months into the war, Nicole's task force encountered a Valkyrie patrol. 6 enemy cruisers caught the human ships in open space with no place to hide. The Valkyrie commanders expected an easy victory. They outnumbered the humans and had heavier weapons. They broadcast demands for surrender. Nicole ordered her ships to attack. The Valkyrie were confused. These small human vessels were charging directly at superior forces. It made no tactical sense. Then the human ships opened fire with everything they had. Dan Carter's new weapons turned the battle. Missiles that scattered into hundreds of smaller warheads overwhelmed Valkyrie point defenses. Kinetic penetrators fired at incredible speeds punched through armor. Electronic warfare systems blinded Valkyrie sensors. The human ships worked together with perfect coordination, concentrating fire on one enemy vessel at a time. The first Valkyrie cruiser exploded 6 minutes into the battle. The second died 3 minutes later. The remaining 4 tried to retreat, but human ships were faster. Nicole's fleet chased them down methodically. The fight lasted 40 minutes. When it ended, all 6 Valkyrie vessels were destroyed. The human ships had damage, but no losses. Nicole did not celebrate the victory. She thought about New Haven and knew this was just the beginning. 6 ships were nothing compared to the Valkyrie fleet. But it was a message. Humanity could fight. Humanity could win. And humanity would not stop until the debt was paid in full. Jake Morrison watched the battle recordings and felt nothing. Destroying ships was not enough. The Valkyrie leadership needed to face justice. The soldiers who killed children needed to answer for their crimes. He started planning ground assaults on Valkyrie colony worlds. It would be dangerous and costly, but necessary. The Valkyrie had to learn that nowhere was safe. Word of human victories spread through the galaxy. Other species started paying attention. Some were impressed by human tactics and determination. Others were disturbed by the ruthless efficiency. Humanity was supposed to be peaceful, diplomatic, friendly. These attacks showed a different side, something cold and calculating. The Concordat Assembly called emergency sessions to discuss the war. Ambassadors from various species demanded that humanity show restraint and follow the rules of civilized warfare. They talked about proportional response and the need for negotiation. Wars were supposed to be limited, controlled affairs with clear objectives and rules. Earth's ambassador was Lisa Crawford, a career diplomat who had spent 20 years building relationships with alien species. She listened to the speeches about restraint and civilization. Then she stood and spoke in a quiet voice that somehow filled the chamber. She told them about Lily Morrison, age 9, killed running to a shelter. She described Mrs. Patterson, age 73, executed on her doorstep. She listed names of children, parents, teachers, farmers. She spoke for an hour, naming the dead of New Haven. When she finished, the chamber was silent. "You ask us to show restraint," Lisa said. "You demand we follow rules. Where were these rules when the Valkyrie murdered our children? Where was the Concordat when New Haven burned? We asked for your help and you did nothing. Now you want to tell us how to respond to genocide?" She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each ambassador. "Humanity will handle this ourselves. Stay out of our way." The message was clear. The war would continue. The Valkyrie would pay for what they did. And the galaxy could either accept it or try to stop humanity and see what happened. Nobody chose to stop them. The war entered its 6th month and humanity showed no signs of slowing down. Admiral Blake commanded over 200 warships now, more than humanity had possessed in total before New Haven. The shipyards worked around the clock building new vessels. Each one incorporated lessons from previous battles. Each one was faster, tougher, and more lethal than the last. The Valkyrie Empire began to feel real pressure for the first time in centuries. Their supply lines were disrupted. Their colonies reported human raids weekly. Trade with other species dried up as merchant ships refused to enter Valkyrie space. The economy started showing strain. Military spending increased to counter the human threat, taking resources from other needs. Colonel Jake Morrison led the first ground assault on a Valkyrie colony world. The planet was called Trekos and held about 2 million Valkyrie civilians plus a garrison of 10,000 soldiers. Intelligence suggested the garrison included units that participated in the New Haven massacre. Jake wanted them specifically. His assault force consisted of 5,000 Marines loaded into dropships. They launched from orbit at dawn, coming down fast through heavy anti-aircraft fire. 3 ships were hit and crashed, but the rest made it to the ground. Jake's boots hit dirt, and he started moving immediately, leading his team toward the primary military base. The fighting was brutal and close. Valkyrie soldiers were tough and well-trained. They had the advantage of knowing the terrain and fighting on their homeworld. But the human Marines fought with a fury that shocked the defenders. They did not take cover when they should. They did not retreat when outnumbered. They just kept pushing forward no matter the cost. Jake fought like a man with nothing to lose. He was first through every door, first into every room. His rifle never stopped firing. When it ran empty, he used his sidearm. When that ran dry, he used his knife. His soldiers followed his example, pushing deeper into the base despite casualties. The battle lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the Valkyrie garrison was destroyed. Jake's forces had taken heavy losses, almost 30% casualties, but they achieved their objective. More importantly, they captured the base commander and 15 officers alive. Jake had them loaded onto the dropships for transport back to human space. They would face trial for war crimes. Captain Nicole Harper's fleet struck deeper into Valkyrie territory, targeting major industrial centers. Her orders came directly from Admiral Blake: destroy anything that helped the Valkyrie war effort. Factories, refineries, power plants, shipyards. Hit them all and keep the pressure constant. Nicole followed her orders, but the work wore on her soul. She watched cities burn from orbit. She ordered strikes on facilities that employed thousands of workers. The Valkyrie were given warnings to evacuate, but not everyone got out in time. She knew civilians were dying because of her commands. The knowledge sat heavy on her conscience. Her tactical officer was Commander Don Carter, promoted after his weapons proved so effective. He sat at his station during strikes and watched the destruction with cold eyes. He felt nothing anymore. The part of him that cared about such things died watching New Haven recordings. Now he just calculated the most efficient way to cause maximum damage. Target destroyed, Don reported as another factory exploded below them. Moving to next objective? Nicole nodded but did not speak. What could she say? This was war. This was justice. This was what the Valkyrie earned when they murdered children. She repeated these thoughts like a prayer, trying to believe them. The Valkyrie government finally attempted diplomacy. They sent messages to Earth requesting negotiations. They offered to pay reparations for New Haven. They proposed a ceasefire while terms were discussed. They suggested neutral arbitration through the Concordat Assembly. Admiral Blake read the proposals and deleted them. There would be no negotiations. The Valkyrie had their chance for peace before they attacked New Haven. They chose violence. Now they would live with the consequences. The human fleet kept advancing, pushing closer to core Valkyrie worlds. Every engagement was a human victory. The tactical advantage had shifted. Human ships were now superior in most categories. Better engines, stronger shields, more accurate weapons. And the human crews fought with a determination that no Valkyrie could match. Jake led more ground assaults, each one taking him closer to the Valkyrie homeworld. He became famous in both human and Valkyrie media. The Valkyrie called him the Butcher, a demon who showed no mercy. Humans called him a hero, a man who refused to let genocide go unpunished. He did not care about either label. He only cared about the mission. His soldiers were fiercely loyal. They followed him into impossible situations and somehow survived. Jake led from the front always, never asking his people to take risks he would not take himself. He learned every soldier's name in his command. He wrote personal letters to the families of those who died. He carried the weight of command without complaint. The Valkyrie tried to rally their allies for support. They called in favors and promised rewards to anyone who would help fight humanity. A few species sent token forces out of old obligations. Most refused to get involved. They had watched the war progress and drew their own conclusions. Humanity was winning and would not forgive interference. One species, the Korathi, sent a small fleet to aid the Valkyrie. They were a warrior culture that respected strength and saw an opportunity to test themselves against these aggressive humans. 20 Korathi warships joined a Valkyrie defense fleet protecting an important colony world. Nicole's task force encountered them during a planned raid. She tried to communicate with the Korathi commander, warning them to withdraw. The Korathi response was laughter and insults. They thought human ships were small and weak. They believed their own propaganda about human cowardice. The battle taught them otherwise. Don Carter unleashed weapons the Korathi had never encountered. Missiles that moved in impossible patterns. Energy beams that cut through shields and armor like they were not there. Electronic attacks that shut down entire ships. The human fleet fought with perfect coordination. Each ship supporting the others. 10 Korathi vessels were destroyed in the first 30 minutes. The survivors tried to retreat, but Nicole pursued them relentlessly. She gave them chances to surrender. They refused and kept fighting. So she destroyed them one by one until only 2 remained. Those finally surrendered, their commanders begging for mercy. Nicole let them go. She gave them a message to take home. Tell your people what happened here. Tell them that humanity does not seek enemies but will not tolerate interference. The Valkyrie are ours to deal with. Stay out of our way. The Korathi survivors limped home and delivered the message. Their government immediately declared neutrality and recalled all forces from Valkyrie space. Other species that might have considered helping the Valkyrie changed their minds. Humanity had made its point clear. The war reached a tipping point. The Valkyrie Empire was crumbling. Colonies were abandoning the homeworld to fend for themselves. Client species were rebelling, seeing opportunity in Valkyrie weakness. The economy was in freefall. Military defeats mounted daily. The government faced internal pressure to end the war before total collapse. Admiral Blake prepared for the final phase of the campaign. The Valkyrie homeworld of Valkyra Prime held 5 billion civilians and the remnants of their military. Taking it would be costly but necessary. The Valkyrie leadership needed to face justice. The people needed to understand the consequences of genocide. Jake volunteered to lead the ground assault. Nicole would command the fleet in orbit. Don would provide the weapons needed to break through defenses. They all knew this would be the bloodiest battle yet. The Valkyrie would fight hardest defending their home. But that did not matter. The mission would proceed. Earth sent additional forces to support the attack. The fleet gathering for the assault on Valkyra Prime numbered over 300 ships. It was the largest human military force ever assembled. Soldiers, sailors, and pilots prepared for battle, knowing many would not return. But they went anyway because the alternative was letting genocide go unpunished. The galaxy watched and waited. Some species hoped the Valkyrie would somehow win and drive back these terrifying humans. Most simply wanted the war to end before it spread further. A few quietly admired human determination and made notes about never provoking them. Ambassador Lisa Crawford spent her time at the Concord Assembly defending human actions. Every day brought new complaints and accusations. Every day she stood before the assembled species and reminded them why this war was necessary. She was tired, worn down by constant arguments, but she never wavered. "You call us monsters," she told the assembly during one heated session. "You say we have become what we fight against? But we did not start this. We did not want this. The Valkyrie made the choice when they killed our children. Now they pay the price. If that makes us monsters in your eyes, so be it. At least we are monsters who protect our people." The fleet departed for Valkyra Prime carrying the hopes and fears of humanity. This would be the endgame, one way or another. Either the Valkyrie would surrender and face justice, or they would be destroyed defending their world. Admiral Blake was prepared for both outcomes. The time for mercy had passed. The blood debt would be paid in full. The human fleet arrived at Valkyra Prime and found it heavily defended. Hundreds of orbital platforms bristled with weapons. Thousands of mines floated in defensive patterns. The remaining Valkyrie fleet, over 200 warships, waited in formation. They knew this was their last stand. If they lost here, the war was over. Admiral Blake studied the defenses from his flagship, the battleship Vengeance. He could force his way through with overwhelming firepower, but casualties would be extreme. The Valkyrie wanted humanity to pay a terrible price for victory. Blake refused to give them that satisfaction. He ordered his ships to hold position just outside weapons range and sent a message to the planet below. The message was simple: surrender. The military leadership and the soldiers who participated at New Haven: stand trial for your crimes. Accept disarmament and monitoring. Do this, and the killing stops today. Refuse and we will take what we want by force. The Valkyrie High Council received the message in their bunker deep beneath the capital city. They have ruled their empire for 3,000 years through fear and strength. The idea of surrendering to anyone, especially humans, was unthinkable. They rejected the terms and ordered their fleet to attack. The Battle of Valkyra Prime began, with a massive missile barrage from the defense platforms. Thousands of warheads streaked toward the human fleet. But Don Carter had prepared for this. Every human ship launched countermeasures that filled space with jamming signals and false targets. The missiles scattered, most missing completely. Those that found targets struck enhanced shields that absorbed the impacts. Nicole led her task force against the left flank of the Valkyrie fleet while other human groups hit the right and center. The Valkyrie ships were tough and their crews fought bravely. They had no choice. Their families lived on the world below. They were not fighting for conquest or glory, but simple survival. The battle turned into a brutal slugging match. Ships on both sides exploded. Debris filled the space around the planet. Nicole watched 3 of her escorts get destroyed, taking out a Valkyrie heavy cruiser. The crew had no time to evacuate. One moment they were there, the next just expanding gas and metal fragments. "Keep pushing," she ordered, her voice flat. She could not afford emotion now. Hundreds of lives depended on her decisions. She targeted another Valkyrie ship and gave the order to fire. The enemy vessel broke apart under concentrated fire from her. Remaining ships. The orbital platforms were harder to destroy than the fleet. They had massive armor and shields powered by the planet below. Don coordinated attacks using his new kinetic weapons. Long rods of dense metal accelerated to incredible speeds punched through platform defenses. It took multiple hits to destroy each one, but humanity had plenty of ammunition. Jake waited in a dropship with 5,000 Marines. They would launch once the orbital defenses were cleared. His job was to capture the High Council before they could escape or destroy records. He checked his equipment for the 10th time and reviewed maps of the Council bunker. His soldiers sat quietly, each lost in private thoughts about the battle ahead. The space battle lasted 14 hours. When it ended, the Valkyrie fleet was destroyed and the orbital platforms were silent. Debris filled the space where proud warships once sailed. Human forces had lost 43 vessels, over 15,000 killed. But they held the orbital space and nothing could stop them from landing now. Admiral Blake broadcast another message to the planet: last chance. Surrender or we come down? This time he gave them 1 hour to decide. The Valkyrie High Council argued behind closed doors. Some wanted to keep fighting. Others saw no point in further destruction. Their fleet was gone. Their defenses were breached. Continuing would only mean more death with no chance of victory. After 50 minutes of heated debate, they voted to reject surrender. The Valkyrie way was to fight until the end. They would not shame their ancestors by bowing to humans. Jake received the go order and his dropship launched along with hundreds of others. They fell through the atmosphere under heavy ground fire. Anti-aircraft weapons filled the sky with explosions. 2 ships to Jake's left exploded. One to his right spiraled down, trailing smoke. His own ship shook from near misses but kept descending. They crashed through the roof of a government building 3 blocks from the council bunker. Jake's soldiers poured out, firing at Valkyrie security forces. The enemy fought hard, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Marines advanced building by building, clearing rooms and securing positions. Jake led a team into the underground tunnels that connected government buildings. These passages were heavily defended by the best Valkyrie soldiers. They had prepared ambush points and strong defensive positions. The fighting was close and brutal. Jake lost soldiers to each ambush but kept pushing forward. There was no time for caution. The council might escape if they delayed. Above ground, the larger battle for the capital city raged. Human forces fought Valkyrie military units in the streets. Aircraft battled overhead. Artillery pounded positions on both sides. Civilians huddled in shelters or fled the fighting. Some tried to resist the invaders. Most just tried to survive. Nicole provided orbital support, carefully striking military targets identified by ground forces. Don coordinated the attacks, trying to minimize civilian casualties while supporting Jake's mission. Every target was verified 3 times before weapons were released. Mistakes now would haunt them forever. Jake reached the council bunker entrance after 2 hours of fighting. His team had taken heavy casualties getting here. Bodies of both humans and Valkyrie lined the tunnels behind them. The bunker door was massive, armored, designed to withstand nuclear weapons. Jake called for the engineers. They placed shaped charges around the door while soldiers held off counterattacks from defending forces. The Valkyrie knew if the bunker fell, the war was over. They threw everything at the humans trying to stop the breach. Jake stood at the front line firing steadily, dropping enemy soldiers as they charged. The charges detonated with a blast that shook the tunnel. The door held but was damaged. Engineers placed more charges and blew them. This time the door failed, twisted metal falling inward. Smoke filled the tunnel. Jake moved forward through the gap, his soldiers behind him. The Valkyrie High Council waited in their command center. 12 elderly Valkyrie in ornate robes sat at a large table. They looked up as armed humans burst into the room. Guards moved to protect the council, but Jake ordered them to stand down. He did not want more killing if it could be avoided. "You are under arrest for crimes against humanity and genocide," Jake said in Velkari language. He had learned it specifically for this moment. "You will be taken to stand trial." The head of the council, an ancient Velkari named Kresh, clicked his mandibles in what might have been laughter. "You think you have won? We are Velkari. We bow to no one. Kill us if you must, but we will never submit to trial by inferior species." Jake looked at the old Velkari who had ordered the New Haven massacre. He thought about Lily dying in his arms. He thought about 15,000 murdered colonists. His hand tightened on his rifle. It would be so easy to shoot them all right here. They deserved it. The galaxy would not blame him, but Jake was not like them. Humanity was not like them. That was the whole point. "You don't get to choose?" Jake said quietly. "You murdered our children. Now you face justice. Stun them." His soldiers fired stun weapons. The council members collapsed unconscious. Jake ordered them loaded onto transport gurneys. They would be taken to the surface and moved to orbit. There would be a trial. The galaxy would see everything the Velkari had done. Then there would be justice. The fighting in the capital continued for another day before the remaining Velkari forces surrendered. Without leadership and facing impossible odds, they laid down their weapons. Human forces secured government buildings and began establishing control. It was not occupation, Blake insisted. It was temporary administration until the Velkari could be dealt with properly. The fleet in orbit maintained position. Weapons ready in case of further resistance. Nicole stared at the planet below and wondered what victory was supposed to feel like. She felt nothing but exhaustion and sadness for all the death. Both sides had lost so much. Was any of it worth it? Don reviewed combat data and made notes for improving weapon systems. He worked mechanically, not thinking about the bigger picture. That was too heavy, too complicated. Better to focus on technical problems with clear solutions. Admiral Blake addressed the fleet after the battle ended. He praised their courage and mourned their losses. He promised the fallen would be remembered and their sacrifice honored, but the war was not over yet. One final task remained. Ambassador Lisa Crawford arrived at Velkara Prime with a team of lawyers and judges. She would oversee the trial of the Velkari High Council. The proceedings would be broadcast across the galaxy. Everyone would see the evidence, everyone would hear the testimony, and everyone would understand why humanity did what it did. The Concordat Assembly protested this plan. They claimed humanity had no authority to conduct such a trial. They demanded the prisoners be turned over to neutral arbitration. Blake refused. This was humanity's justice for crimes against humanity. The galaxy could watch and learn. Jake spent days documenting evidence from government files. The Velkari had kept detailed records. The trial began 3 weeks after the battle ended. A massive hall in the capital city was converted into a courtroom. Cameras broadcast everything to the galaxy. Representatives from dozens of species attended as observers. The Velkari High Council sat in secure containment, forced to watch as their crimes were exposed. Ambassador Lisa Crawford served as chief prosecutor. She had spent years building relationships with alien species through diplomacy. Now she would use those skills to present a case that demanded justice. She stood before the court and began with a simple statement. This trial is not about revenge. It is about accountability. The defendants committed genocide not once but multiple times over centuries. They murdered entire populations. They destroyed civilizations. And they did it believing they would never face consequences? The first evidence presented came from New Haven. Video recordings played showing the massacre in brutal detail. The courtroom fell silent as images of dying children filled the screens. Some observers left, unable to watch. The Velkari Council showed no emotion, their insectoid faces impossible to read. Jake Morrison testified next. He walked to the stand wearing his dress uniform with medals he earned in the war. He spoke in a steady voice about finding his daughter dying, about watching his neighbors executed, about the 300 survivors who lived because they were underground when the killing happened. They did not come to conquer, Jake said. They did not demand resources or territory. They came only to kill. Every person they found was executed. Children, elderly, sick, injured. Nobody was spared. That was not war. That was extermination. The defense attorneys appointed by the Concordat to ensure fair proceedings tried to argue that New Haven was a military necessity. The Valkyrie saw humanity as a threat and struck first. It was harsh but not different from what other species had done in conflicts throughout history. Lisa demolished that argument with evidence from captured Valkyrie files. The attack was not about military strategy. It was about demonstrating dominance. Internal communications showed the High Council chose New Haven specifically because it was peaceful and defenseless. They wanted to terrify humanity into submission. The massacre was deliberate terrorism designed to traumatize an entire species. More evidence followed. Records of previous genocides committed by the Valkyrie. 6 other species had been exterminated completely over the centuries. The Valkyrie kept detailed files on each one, treating the extinctions as achievements. They had destroyed civilizations and erased cultures, all while the rest of the galaxy looked away. Captain Nicole Harper testified about the war itself. She described battles and casualties. She admitted that human forces had destroyed Valkyrie infrastructure and killed soldiers and some civilians. But she emphasized that humans gave warnings, allowed evacuations, and targeted military objectives. The Valkyrie at New Haven had done none of those things. We fought a war, Nicole said. They committed murder. There is a difference. Commander Dan Carter presented evidence of Valkyrie weapons designed specifically to cause maximum suffering. The energy weapons used at New Haven were not efficient military tools. They were torture devices meant to kill slowly and painfully. The Valkyrie could have used quick weapons but chose suffering instead. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Every day brought new evidence of Valkyrie crimes. Survivors of previous genocides testified via video, species that barely escaped extinction sharing their stories. Expert witnesses analyzed Valkyrie culture and found it built on violence and domination. Psychologists explained how an entire civilization could normalize genocide. The defense tried to argue cultural relativism. The Valkyrie had different values and should not be judged by human standards. Different species had different approaches to conflict. What seemed monstrous to humans might be normal for Valkyrie. Lisa addressed this argument directly. There is no culture in this galaxy that accepts the murder of children as normal. There is no species that believes genocide is acceptable behavior. The defendants committed acts that every civilized species recognizes as evil. They will be judged by universal standards that transcend culture. The Valkyrie Council finally spoke in their own defense. Kresh, their leader, addressed the court in a voice that dripped with contempt. He showed no remorse for New Haven or any other genocide. He claimed Valkyrie superiority justified their actions. Weaker species existed to serve or be eliminated. That was the natural order. We are apex predators, Kresh said. We took what we wanted and destroyed threats. That is how the strong survive. You call it genocide. We call it natural selection. Humans are no different. You destroyed our empire with the same brutality you condemn us for. Jake listened to this and felt anger rise in his chest. He wanted to argue, to shout that humanity was nothing like the Valkyrie, but he remained silent. The evidence spoke clearly enough. Context mattered. Intent mattered. Humanity fought to stop genocide, not commit it. After 6 weeks of testimony, the judges deliberated for 3 days. The panel consisted of representatives from 7 neutral species, chosen for their experience with international law. They reviewed thousands of pages of evidence and hundreds of hours of testimony. The burden of proof was high because the penalties would be severe. The verdict came on a morning when 2 million people across the galaxy watched the broadcasts. The lead judge, an elderly being from the Nexian Confederation, read the decision in a solemn voice. We find the defendants guilty of genocide, crimes against sentient beings, and violations of the most basic principles of civilized conduct. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. The Valkyrie High Council ordered the deliberate extermination of multiple species, including the massacre at New Haven. They showed no remorse and would continue these crimes if given opportunity. The courtroom erupted in noise. Observers argued about the verdict. Some species cheered. Others protested. The Valkyrie observers sat in angry silence. The council members showed nothing, their alien faces unreadable. The judge called for order and continued. The sentence must serve three purposes: punishment for past crimes, prevention of future crimes, and a message to the galaxy that genocide will never be tolerated. Admiral Blake sat in the observation section listening carefully. He knew what was coming next. He had worked with the judges and prosecution to develop a sentence that fit the crime. It was harsh. It was unprecedented. And it was absolutely necessary. The sentence is as follows, the judge announced. The Valkyrie High Council members will be imprisoned for life. The Valkyrie Empire is dissolved effective immediately. All Valkyrie military forces are disbanded. All Valkyrie colonies will be evacuated and the population relocated to a single designated system. Protests erupted from Valkyrie observers. The judge continued over the noise. The Valkyrie homeworld of Valkara Prime and all colony worlds will be rendered uninhabitable. Their cities, monuments, and historical sites will be destroyed. The Valkyrie people will be given basic resources to rebuild in their new system, but all advanced technology will be confiscated. They will start again with nothing. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Species representatives shouted arguments. The Valkyrie Council fought against their restraints. Security forces struggled to maintain order. The judge stood waiting for silence. When it finally came, she spoke her final words. This sentence ensures the Valkyrie can never threaten anyone again. They will survive as a people, but their empire, their military power, and their capacity for genocide ends today. Let this serve as a warning to any species that would follow their path. Jake sat stunned by the severity of the sentence. Destroying the Valkyrie homeworld seemed extreme even to him. But he thought about Lily and the 15,000 dead at New Haven. He thought about the 6 extinct species that never got justice. Maybe extreme was what the situation required. Nicole felt sick listening to the sentence. She would be part of the force that destroyed Valkyrie worlds. More death, more destruction, all in the name of justice. She wondered when it would end, when the killing would finally stop. But she also knew the Valkyrie left humanity no choice. Don calculated what weapons would be needed to destroy entire worlds. Rendering planets uninhabitable required massive firepower applied precisely. It was technically challenging but achievable. He began planning the operation mechanically. Not thinking about what it meant, Lisa stood and thanked the judges for their service. She knew the sentence would be controversial. Many species would condemn humanity for being too harsh. Others would say it was not harsh enough. But the sentence was fair given the scope of Valkyrie crimes. Justice demanded consequences. The Concordat Assembly held emergency sessions to discuss the verdict. Some species called for intervention to stop humanity from carrying out the sentence. They claimed destroying worlds was itself a crime. Others argued the Valkyrie earned their fate and humanity had the right to enforce the sentence. In the end, no species chose to interfere. The human fleet at Valkara Prime was too powerful. The evidence of Valkyrie crimes was too clear. And most importantly, nobody wanted to become humanity's next enemy. The war had shown what humans were capable of when truly motivated. Better to let them finish and hope they returned to being peaceful afterward. The evacuation of Valkara Prime began immediately. 7 billion Valkyrie had to be. The destruction of Valkara Prime took 3 days. Human warships in orbit fired kinetic weapons that struck with the force of nuclear bombs. Cities crumbled under the impacts. Ancient monuments that had stood for millennia collapsed into dust. The planetary defense grid was dismantled piece by piece. Cultural centers, museums, government buildings, all reduced to rubble. Nicole commanded the operation from the Defiant. Each target was carefully selected from lists approved by the court. They were not randomly destroying but systematically erasing the Valkyrie Empire's legacy. She watched cities burn and felt nothing. That emptiness worried her more than the destruction itself. Don coordinated the bombardment with precision. His weapons hit exactly where intended, causing maximum structural damage while minimizing environmental harm. The planet would recover eventually. Plant life would return. Oceans would remain clean. But nothing of Valkyrie civilization would survive. Jake watched from a transport ship carrying the last load of captured equipment and records. The Valkyrie had kept detailed histories of their empire. Those documents were being taken to Earth for preservation. Future generations needed to remember what happened here. They needed to understand why it was necessary. The bombardment ended when every significant structure was destroyed. Valkara Prime now looked like a world hit by natural disasters. No cities, no roads, no sign that advanced civilization had ever existed. Nature would reclaim it in time, but the Valkyrie Empire was gone forever. 6 colony worlds received the same treatment over the following weeks. Each one was evacuated, then systematically demolished. Billions of Valkyrie watched from their new home system as everything they knew was erased. Some understood it as justice. Others saw it as genocide in return for genocide. Most just felt lost and confused, unsure what future awaited them. The Valkyrie were given enough resources to survive, but nothing more. Basic shelters, food production equipment, medical supplies. They would have to rebuild from almost nothing, creating a new society without weapons or advanced technology. Whether they learned from their mistakes or repeated them was their choice. But they would never threaten anyone else again. Admiral Blake gave a final address to his fleet before they withdrew from Valkyrie space. He stood on the bridge of the Vengeance, surrounded by officers who had fought the entire war. Many were wounded. All were exhausted. They had done terrible things in the name of justice and would carry those memories forever. "What we did here was necessary," Blake said, his voice heavy with the weight of command. "The Valkyrie committed genocide and would have continued if we did nothing. We stopped them. We made sure they can never harm anyone again. Some will call us monsters for this. Perhaps they are right. But we protected our people and avenged the innocent. That has to be enough." The fleet departed, leaving behind monitoring stations to ensure the Valkyrie followed the terms of their sentence. The journey back to Earth took 2 months. Ships needed repairs. Crews needed rest. Everyone needed time to process what they had experienced. Jake returned to New Haven during the voyage. The colony had been rebuilt while the war raged. New buildings stood where the old ones burned. Families moved in to replace those who died. Life continued because that was what humans did. They endured. They rebuilt. They moved forward. A memorial stood in the center of the colony. Black granite walls covered with names. 15,000 colonists who died that terrible day. Jake found Lily's name carved in the stone and placed his hand on it. He spoke to her quietly, telling her about the trial and the sentence. Telling her the people who killed her would never hurt anyone else. "I don't know if you would approve of what we did," Jake said to the stone. "It was brutal. People died. Worlds were destroyed. But they left us no choice. They had to be stopped." He stood there for a long time, one hand on his daughter's name, and cried for the first time since she died. The tears came hard and would not stop. All the grief and rage and exhaustion poured out until he was empty. When it finally ended, he felt lighter. Not healed, but perhaps ready to start healing. Nicole resigned her commission when they reached Earth. She could not continue serving after what she had done. The nightmares were too strong. The guilt too heavy. She moved to a quiet town far from any military base and tried to find peace. It eluded her most days. She saw a therapist who specialized in combat trauma. They talked about moral injury, about doing necessary things that violated personal values. The therapist said healing took time and might never be complete. Nicole learned to live with what she had done without letting it destroy her. It was the best she could manage. Don stayed in the military, but transferred to defensive research. He never wanted to design offensive weapons again. The things he created during the war were too effective, too terrible. He spent the rest of his career developing shields and protection systems, trying to balance the scales of what he had unleashed. He never spoke publicly about his role in the war. When reporters asked about the weapons he designed, he refused interviews. Let history judge him harshly. He had no defense to offer and wanted none. Admiral Blake continued commanding the fleet for another 5 years before retiring. He became the face of humanity's response to New Haven, praised by some and condemned by others. He accepted both reactions with equal calm. What mattered was that humanity had protected itself and established clear boundaries. Attack our people and we will end you. Simple, direct, effective. Ambassador Lisa Crawford remained at the Concordat Assembly, working to repair relationships damaged by the war. Some species would never trust humanity again. They saw the destruction of the Valkyrie Empire as proof that humans were dangerously violent. Lisa could not entirely disagree, but did her best to present humanity's better nature. Other species gained new respect for humanity. They saw a people who would defend themselves with total commitment, who valued their civilians enough to wage unlimited war against those who harmed them. These species became strong allies, knowing humanity would be loyal to friends and merciless to enemies. The war changed humanity fundamentally. Before New Haven, they were explorers and traders, eager to join the galactic community. After the war, they were respected and feared. Other species approached diplomatic negotiations more carefully. Nobody wanted to provoke another human response. Humanity's military remained strong. The shipyards kept building. The training continued. Earth would never again be caught unprepared if threats emerged. The lesson of New Haven was learned permanently. Peace was wonderful, but strength was necessary. The Valkyrie adapted slowly to their new existence. Without their empire or military, they had to develop new ways of living. Some embraced the change, building a society focused on art and philosophy rather than conquest. Others clung to old beliefs, dreaming of restoration that would never come. A generation passed before the first Valkyrie delegation asked to meet with human representatives. They were young adults who grew up in exile, who never knew the empire at its height. They came to apologize for New Haven and ask if reconciliation was possible. The meeting took place at a neutral space station, far from both human and Valkyrie territory. Jake Morrison attended as representative of the New Haven survivors. He was older now, his hair gray, but the memories remained fresh. He listened as young Valkyrie expressed regret for crimes their parents' generation committed. "We cannot change what happened," the lead Valkyrie delegate said through a translator. "We can only promise it will never happen again. Our people are different now. We have learned. We have changed. We ask nothing except acknowledgement that we are not them." Jake looked at these young aliens who had nothing to do with his daughter's death. They were innocent of those crimes, but they carried the burden anyway, as children often do. He thought for a long time before responding. "The debt is paid," Jake said finally. "Your people face justice. The empire that committed genocide is gone. What you build now is your choice. If you choose peace, humanity will accept it. If you choose war, you know what happens. The past is finished. Make sure the future is different." The Valkyrie delegation left with his words. It was not forgiveness exactly. Perhaps forgiveness was impossible for some crimes. But it was acknowledgement that punishment had been served and new generations deserved new chances. Years became decades. The war faded from immediate memory into history. New conflicts arose requiring attention. New friends and enemies emerged. The galaxy moved forward because that was what living beings did. New Haven thrived as a symbol of human resilience. The colony grew larger than before, becoming a trade hub and cultural center. Tourists visited the memorial to pay respects and remember what happened. Schools taught about the massacre and the war as cautionary tales about the cost of hatred. Jake lived long enough to see his grandchildren, children of the sun who survived the massacre. They grew up in peace, never experiencing the horrors he had witnessed. That was enough. That was what the war had been for, so they could live without fear. He died quietly at age 87, surrounded by family. His funeral was attended by thousands, including veterans who served under his command. They lowered his coffin next to Lily's grave at New Haven, together again finally. Father and daughter reunited in the soil of the world they both called home. Nicole attended.